Well, okay, friends, welcome. In the last class, we have studied about the Sultanate period history writing, and now we are going to start our discussion on the history writing during the Mughal period. So, during the last topic that we have discussed, we have seen that it is a new kind of trend that came in history writing during the Sultanate period, and before that, we hardly had any trend of writing history that is called scientific history, where the investigation is done. Mostly it is a kind of mythological kind of writing and the philosophical, religious kind of writing. It is not that it did not had any history, but it was a kind of embedded history, as Romila Thapar calls it. But it is during the Sultanate period that the history as a profession came into existence, and after that we find that during the Mughal period had a long era of peace and prosperity. India, this very significant portion of India was unified under the one command. And there was, it is believed that there was a progress in all the dimension of life, architecture and art and literature. And similarly, the history writing had also improved over that of Sultanate period. It became more richer, it became more subject matter became more varied, more objective, more mature, and it became more sober and more dignified. The historian, they started looking beyond the court life, and they started taking note of the different dimensions of life. The important features of the history writing of this period is that we have a autobiographical kind of writing where a lot of resources which could be useful for the future generation are generated. We have significant volume of government correspondence, reports, newsletters, farman, coin. There are a number of non-official document, and there are literature of Sufis. One important feature of this period, history written during this period, is also non-official history. During the Sultanate period, mostly the history is written by those people who were employed by the Sultan. But now the Persian language and the interest in history, it has become relatively widespread, and there were some people who wrote history of their own, not anyway, patronized by the Sultan. And this independent historian, their work is more important in the sense that because it reflects an independent viewpoint. If somebody is employed by Sultan, definitely he will write something that will please Sultan. But if somebody writes independently, he that reflects his own independent opinion. So we have very evident writing, and we can very vividly draw the picture of Mughal period. Persian, Farsi, as it is called, became an important language of correspondence, important language of literature, important language of elite. And during the Sultanate period, most of the people, not most, all the people who wrote in Farsi were Muslims. But now, as the Muslim rule became well established in India, Muslim population became a significant portion of the Indian population, and Parsi became widespread there. And as it was a language of the court, official language. Some of the Hindus also started learning Persian, and during this period, Mughal period, we find that some of the Hindus have also written history in Persian language. So the history writing of this period can be classified into the nine category. This is very voluminous, very big amount of history is written during this period. One category is autobiographical. Some of the people of this period, especially the ruler, they have written their autobiographies. Then there are biographical kind of writing. And then there is official history prepared by the official. Then government records, gazetters, and official manual. Then collection of letters. Huge correspondence has come to our hand. Then non-official private history. There are some people, as I told you, they were just interested in history writing, and they wrote this non-official kind of history writing, which reflects an independent viewpoint. Then there are provincial local history. Apart from the Delhi centric writing, number of people at scattered at different places, they also started writing the history. Then there are biographies of Sufi, and there are of course literary work inspired by the historical event. So let us talk about the first category of history writing, that is autobiography, and it started by ruler. Uh, Autobiography is quite little different than the official history, because official history generally it will talk about the official matters, court conspiracies, and in the autobiographical sketch, apart from this political event, we do get peep into the personal life of the ruler. And the very important text in this category is an autobiography of Babar. It is called Tuzuk-e-Babari. It is originally written in the Turkish Persian language. It is a mixture of these two languages, which was prevailing in the Transoxania, the region from where Babur originally belonged to. He was the king of Fargana. He became ruler at a very young age, and then from there, later on, he came to Kabul, and then later on, he conquered North Indian part and established himself as at Delhi. It is called Tuzuki Babari originally, and then later on, when it was translated into Persian language, generally it is referred as Babarnama. So, Babarnama and Tuzuki Babari are the same text. Only thing is that when it was translated, it began to be referred as Babarnama. But originally, it is written in Chagatai Turki. The language is called Chagatai Turki, which is a mixture of Turki and Persian language. So it is a quite a poetic description of this land, and he was quite unhappy over the climate, which is very hot for him, because he came from the very cold region. And he claimed that he is writing the truth, and nevertheless, it is a good literary masterpiece. It is considered as a good masterpiece of Turkish prose writing. And but while narrating about the Indian ruler, he says hero doesn't trust their character. He calls them untrustworthy. So he definitely some biasness is there, but he definitely praises Indian artisan. Then the next important autobiographical writing of this period is Tuzuke Jahangiri, which is again an autobiographical account of the Mughal ruler Jahangir. But in when you compare this text with Tuzuki Babri, the literary merit is much on the lesser side. Uh, Babar had much more literary accomplishment. His text is considered as a much better masterpiece of the Turkish literature, and but then Jahangir's writing was not so rich. And he wrote, it gives an account of the first 12 years of regime of Jahangir, and then Jahangir handed over this responsibility to somebody else. Mm, Mutamat Khan. Mutamat Khan he employed, and then he said, ki, okay, whatever I am telling you, you just write it. And before that, for 12 years of regime, he writes. At some of the places, he is quite candid in confessing his crime, like murder of Abul Fazl. Abul Fazl was one of the noble. Abul Fazl was one of the important historian of Akbar's period also, and one among the Navratnas of Akbar's court. And Akbar had a quite faith on him. But he was murdered by Prince Salim, that is who became Emperor Jahangir later on. Jahangir himself did not murder Abul Fazl, but he got him murdered through somebody else, and that he writes. But then some of the things he misses, like for example, he doesn't write about Noor Jahan. Noor Jahan was married to the person called Sher Afghan, and this Sher Afghan he dies. There are some nobles who revolt against Mughal emperor, and Sher Afghan dies, and Noor Jahan becomes widow, and then later on, it is Jahangir who got who marries Noor Jahan. Even Noor Jahan also had children from her earlier marriage. So a lot of things about Noor Jahan and Khusro. Khusro was the eldest son of Prince Salim. I mean, Prince Salim himself becomes Jahangir later on. So this Khusro, he revolted against his own father, and then his revolt was crushed, and then he was blinded and thrown in the jail. Then later on, he was released, but then he dies untimely death. So a lot of things are there which Jahangir doesn't refer in his autobiography, but there are certain things he does mention, like administrative measure, his military expedition, different diseases, people's behavior. So he was a very keen observation, very minute observation of the people that we can see Jahangir was. Uh, Then we come to the next genre of writing, next type of writing, that is called biographies. Then in this biographical account, there are two very important, uh, that is Kunnani Humayuni. And this Kunnani Humayuni is written by Khwanda Mir, and it gives information about Humayun's life, and how he dealt with the Indian noble and landed aristocracy. Then there is a text called Humayun Nama, and the interesting thing about Humayun Nama is that this is written by one woman. She was sister, half sister of Humayun, that is daughter of Babur, and she writes this text about her brother Humayun Nama, that is Gulbadan Begum. Well, now let us go to the next. Uh, during see this early phase, that is a phase of Babur and Humayun, we don't find a lot of writing done. Babur's period, his autobiography is definitely famous, but the period of Babur and Humayun was the period of uncertainties. Mughal Empire was not very well established, and Humayun life was quite a disturbed life. He had to run away from India. But it is during the Akbar's period that the Mughal Empire was stabilized, and it made progress in all direction, including the history writing. So let us now discuss about the writing of Akbar's period. In fact, there is a very good book written by professor at JNU, Harbans Mukhia, and the historians and historiography during the region of Akbar. So this was his PhD thesis, which is now published in the form of the book. So the very important book written during the early phase of Akbar's regime is Tariq Alfi. And during the regime of Akbar, 1000 years of Islam was completed. Islam was founded in 7th century, and now 1000 years was completed. So Akbar, he thought that why not the history of this 1000 year of Islam should be written. And he sponsored a project which was in fact monitored by him, and number of historians contributed to this project, including very famous person like Nizamuddin Ahmad and Badayuni, and that covers history of Islam since beginning to 1591. And then next important book of written during Akbar's period is Tazkarat-e Humayun wa Akbar, which is written by Bayazid Biat, and it talks about Humayun's life in Iran, Kabul, and India. Humayun was expelled by Sher Shah Suri, and he has to run away to Iran, and then later on he comes back. So it gives information about Humayun's life in those area like Iran and Kabul. And then Tachkarat wal Wakayat, which is written by Johar Aptabichi. In fact, Johar Aptabichi was personal servant of Humayun, and Humayun, he has observed Humayun very closely, and it is believed that it was this Aptabichi used to be the person who used to carry water for the soldiers. They had the big leather bag made up of a big leather bag, and in that leather bag they will fill the water from river and carry it for the soldier to the military camp or during the war. So when in when in around 1539-40, when Humayun was defeated in the battle of Kanauj, and he has to save his life by swimming across the river, he jumps into the river, but he was about to be drowned. And it is believed that this Aftabichi, who was a water carrier, he had this leather bag with him, and if you throw away the water from leather bag and fill it with the air, that leather bag can save your life. It gives you support, and that is what he has done. He threw his leather bag towards towards the king who was escaping with his life, Humayun, and Humayun could save his life with the help of that bag. And later on, Humayun was expelled, and then he spent nearly 15 years outside India, in Iran. Then he comes back to Kabul, and then comes back to India. And then, but then immediately after after coming back to India, within a year he dies, 1556, and Akbar becomes the king. But then Akbar, after becoming the king, he finds out this person, Aptabichi, and he calls him. He says, "Ki, you have served my father. I want that account is to be recorded. So you narrate whatever you knows about my father, and that will be recorded by somebody else. And that is how this text has come into existence, Tazkarat ul Wiqayat, which gives an account of the personal life of Humayun, which is narrated by his personal servant. These are the early efforts, but during the Akbar's period, there are two important, very important historians. One is Badayuni, and another one is Abul Fazl. So we'll be talking about these two people. Now, these two people, Badayuni and Abul Fazl, very interestingly, they represent two different opinions. Badayuni represent the opinion of the Orthodox Muslim, and this Orthodox Muslim, they were very critical of Akbar's liberal policy. Akbar was, he was trying to treat Hindus and Muslim on the equal footing, and then he also founded his creed, Dine Ilahi. Anybody can become the member of Dine Ilahi, and all that was criticized by Orthodox Muslim. They said how Hindus and Muslim can be equal. Muslim is the only true religion, and Muslims are superior. That is the kind of opinion of the Orthodox Muslim, and this Badayuni, he represent that opinion. And in contrast, Abul Fazl, he represents Akbar's liberal opinion, that what Akbar is trying to do, Akbar is trying to establish peace across the people practicing different religion, and that is a good thing. So, let us talk about Badawi first. His full name was Mullah Abdul Qadir. He was from Badaun, so he is generally known as Badawini. He was quite orthodox, but he was very learned also. Akbar was quite impressed by him. He was appointed Imam, and Akbar gave him 1000 bigha land. But this did not change his attitude. He continued to criticize Akbar and his treatment towards Hindu and his Dine Ilahi. Uh, he was also critical of Abul Fazl. Abul Fazl and this Badayuni, they studied together. Badayuni was quite elder to him, and he was quite jealous that Abul Fazl is rising very high in the court. He is becoming an important person for Akbar. Well, coming back to Badayuni's book, that is Muntakab ul Tariq, that is a book written by Badayuni, and this book is having three volumes. The first volume, it gives information about Humayun and Sher Shah. Mm, then next, the second volume gives information about the 40 years of rule of Akbar, and the third volume is a biography of the contemporary poet, philosopher, and son. He is very critical about his opponent Abul Fazl, and that bitterness is reflected in his language. Sometimes he uses very indecent language as well. But this text is important because it gives us information about the opinion of the Orthodox people, what the Orthodox people thought about Hindus, what they thought about the Akbar's rule, Akbar's liberal policies. That information we can get it from here. In fact, Abul Fazl and Badayuni, they both studied together under Sheikh Mubarak, and Sheikh Mubarak was father of Abul Fazl. Now, next important historian who was ideologically opponent to Badayuni is Abul Fazl. He was son of Sheikh Sheikh Mubarak. Sheikh Mubarak was in initial life he was quite orthodox initially, but later on he became quite liberal, and we find that same liberal attitude reflected in the writing and personality of Abul Fazl. Abul Fazl was born in 1551. He became teacher. Sheikh Mubarak had also some influence in Akbar's court, and through him, Abul Fazl got entry in Akbar's court. Akbar was Akbar wanted somebody who can intellectually support his policy of being liberal towards Hindus, and he found he found that kind of person in Abul Fazl. Abul Fazl supported Akbar's policy and wrote in support of Akbar. So they got along quite well, and Akbar was very fond of Abul Fazl. When Abul Fazl was murdered by Jahangir, Jahangir was Prince Salim during those days. Akbar was very badly hurt, and under the instruction of Akbar, Abul Fazl started writing his history. So a lot of information from the different provinces. Akbar had ordered the different provincial governor that all the information that is required for writing of the historical text for Abul Fazl, that should be provided to him. So a lot of information came from all those different provinces, different important centers. Mm, so a lot of with hard work, he collected a lot of resources. He interviewed many people. He examined young and old witness. And with this, he wrote his history, that is Akbarnama and Aine Akbari. So Akbarnama, the first part is political history of Babur and Humayun. Second part, it talks about Akbar's accession to throne up to 1602, and the third part is in fact Aine Akbari. So third part, it talks with the administration of Akbar, and this Aine Akbari, that is third part of Akbarnama, is also having 5 volumes. So it's very elaborate detail. You know, a lot of information is given there. And here he also talks about his position of history. And he says that history writing during the Sultanate period was not scientific, it is a wastage of time, and they did not had any regard for the truth. Then he is, in his writing, we find that he showers a lot of praise on Akbar. He doesn't mention any mistake of Akbar. For him, Akbar was almost like a god who can make no mistake. Akbar was the important source of the great change. And Abul Fazl, he really captures the liberal mood of his time. He depicts the manners of the people. He captures the spirit of his age in art, social life, administration, and culture. Abul Fazl said that history is like a pearl of science, and it quiets your mind. If you are disturbed, it quiets your mind. It gives you spiritual, physical peace of mind, and it gives it dispel your darkness. And he also praises the policy of Sule Kul, practiced by Akbar. Sule Kul means peace for everybody. Akbar wanted to have peace for everybody. And then next, that is Ain Akbari, 5 volumes, which gives a very detailed description. Mm, and it is based on lot of sources that is studied by Abul Fazl, so it is quite reliable in spite of he showering very high praise on the on Akbar. So in Ain Akbari we get information like what are the different means of economic production, how the revenue system work, what are the expenditures, population, industries, different goods, what were their costs, and different officers, their responsibility. Uh, Chronological sequence is maintained. Well, there are shortcomings in Abul Fazl's writing, and one of the important shortcoming is his devotion to Akbar, who was considered almost like a god. His vices are minimized and virtues are highlighted. Abul Fazl was a kind of artist. He was not a scientific historian. I mean, he was, but he was an artist first. That means he wanted to present his history in an artistic manner. But here also, it did not really work out because Persian is a language which is more suitable for poetry, and if you apply that language to the scientific subject like history, there is bound to be a kind of disharmony, and that we find in Abul Fazl's writing and in many of the Persian historiography. It is a language which is having a lot of ornamentation. It is more suitable for the poetic and artistic purpose. The writing of Abul Fazl, it's encyclopedic nature. A lot of information is there, very big, and hardly anybody reads it until unless you are very very thoroughly interested in history. It is not pleasurable writing, but neither Abul Fazl wanted it. He writes at one place, my writing is not oriented towards the general people. It is oriented towards the specialist. Anybody, someone who is having highly interested in history and kind of intellectual. Well, now next important text of Akbar's period is Tabqat-e-Akbari, written by Khwaja Nizamuddin Ahmad, and that was completed in 1593, and he was Bakshi in the service of Akbar. The role of Bakshi used to be the paying the salary of the soldiers. So this book, Tabqat-e-Akbari, gives information about the 38 years of Akbar's period, and it gives information about the 9 provinces of Akbar's empire. Mm, and he says that there are 3,200 towns and 120 big cities. And he also says that I have referred to 28 sources to write this book. Then comes the period of Jahangir. Jahangir, as I have already told you earlier, he wrote his autobiography, Tuzuki Jahangiri, but he wrote only for the 12 years of his regime, and then later on he handed over this responsibility to the person called Mutamad Khan. And this same Mutamad Khan, who helped Jahangir in writing his autobiography, also wrote a text called Iqbal Nama-e Jahangiri, and that was completed in 1630. It covers history from Babur to Jahangir, and in fact, he wrote after Shah Jahan became an emperor. Jahangir dies in 1627, and during this Jahangir's period, Shah Jahan, who was Prince Khurram, he revolted against his father. So, in this Iqbal Nama Jahangiri, we find that Prince Khurram's rebellion was justified. Obviously, he wrote on the order of Shah Jahan. The next important text written by Khwaja Khamgar Hussain is Masir-e Jahangiri, and this gives information about the last period of Jahangir's life. And again here, Khusro's who revolted, Khusro's supporter, their role is described, and it also describes about Jahangir's interest in fauna and flora and animal breeding. Then Qazi Narul Haq, he wrote uh, Zubadat ye Tariq, and that gives history of the Muslim ruler till Jahangir. Then there was a person called Nemat Allah Haravi, and he was working under one of the Mughal noble Khane Jahan Lodhi, and he wrote the historical text Tarikh Khan Jahani. So this we find that noble also they are patronizing historian, and the history writing is now becoming more and more diversified. Then comes Shahjahan's period. Shahjahan's period was a period of peace and prosperity. There was a growth of art, literature, and Mirza Amin Kuzvini, he started writing Padshah under the instruction of Shahjahan. But Shahjahan did not like the way Kuzvini was writing, and then later on, this responsibility was given to Abdul Hamid Lahori. And Lahori, he considered Abul Fazl as his role model, and on the similar style, he tried to write history. And this Patshanama, it gives information about the first 20 years rule of Shah Jahan. And political event, he also gives information about the contemporary social, economic, and cultural condition. Uh, Generally, as most of the history writing of this period, it focuses on the life of the elite, the upper class society. But nevertheless, he gives description about the famine that took place during Shah Jahan's period in Gujarat and South India. How pathetic was the condition. People were willing to sell themselves, but there was no one to buy, and there was no food for many people. The book is, it is written on the order of the king, and then the book also reflects how during Akbar's period there was a era of tolerance, religious tolerance, and how now that religious tolerance is now giving way to intolerance. In comparison to Akbar, Jahangir was little more intolerant towards the non-Muslim, and Shah Jahan was further little more intolerant towards non-Muslim, and then Akbar was, we know that he was much more intolerant towards Hindus. He tried to convert people, and he gave order of the breaking of the temple, so on and so forth. So, how that liberal atmosphere is now becoming more and more intolerant, that we find reflected in his text. Then there is another text called, this book, Padshanama, written by Abdul Hamid Lahori. It also gives information about the poet, scholar, and saints. The next important text of Shah Jahan's period is Shahjahan Nama, which is written by a person called Inayat Khan, and it describes the history from Babur to 1657. Just a minute. Well, now up to the here we have discussed about up to Shah Jahan's period. Now during Aurangzeb period, the history writing, Aurangzeb personally was not in favor of continuation of official history writing. Because one of the opinion behind this reason is that he was a religious minded people and did not was not interested that the activities of the common man should be recorded. But the another opinion is that probably he was afraid that as he has killed his own brothers and their son, all that will be recorded by the historian and that will tarnish his image. So he stopped the history writing. But by the Aurangzeb's time, there were a number of people who started taking interest in history, and we find during Aurangzeb's time, lot of independent historians who wrote without any patronage from the king, who wrote on their own, are being written. But Aurangzeb, he himself could not do away with the his writing altogether. Some record he need to keep, and the official history that is sanctioned by him is the text called Alamgir Nama, and that is written by Kazim. He stopped. He was quite uncertain. He stopped. Then again he started. But nevertheless, this Alamgir Nama is a text that is official, that gives opinion of the official historian. Uh, Now, next important text of this period is Masire Alamgiri, written by Muhammad Saki Mustad Khan. And this person, he was contemporary Aurangzeb. He served under empire for 40 years, and he was an eyewitness to many accounts. And he wrote history based on scientific records. Uh, and he did not write on the instruction of the king, but he wrote on his own. This translation of Masiri Alamgiri, which is done by Jadunat Sarkar, is with me. This is the English translation. And the observation is quite objective here. And in fact, this text came to the light after the death of Aurangzeb. The next important text of this period is Tarikh-e-Khafi Khan, which is also, the original name is Muntakab ul Lubab. It is also called Tarikh-e-Khafi Khan. And the Kafi Khan, the original name of this person was Muhammad Hasim Khan, and he was also in the service of Aurangzeb. But he wrote secretly, as Aurangzeb was against his writing. So Kafi means chupa hua, someone who is hidden. So he came, instead of Muhammad Hakim Khan, he came, later on he came to be known as Kafi Khan, somebody who has written history in incognito, without anybody knowing about it. And his text, that is Muntakab ul Lubab, also published after the death of Aurangzeb. He was, so he when Aurangzeb invaded South, he was eyewitness to a lot of accounts. So he wrote history starting from the attack of Muhammad Ghori to 1733. He also described social events. He described the Irani-Turani conflict of Aurangzeb's period. There were a group of people who came from Iran and there were Turk. So they had certain conflict in the Aurangzeb's court. Then how Aurangzeb modified Mansabdari, how the central administration was conducted during the Mughals period. He writes about Mughal Maratha conflict, and he definitely, as he was a Mughal historian, he praises Aurangzeb, and he calls Shivaji as killer of Afzal Khan. But nevertheless, he does give credit to Shivaji, that Shivaji had strict instruction to his soldier that a mosque is not to be destroyed, and when you attack enemy territory, a Muslim woman is not to be troubled. So in a way, he acknowledges that Shivaji had an exemplary character and instructed his soldiers to follow the same high moral values. Then Muhammad Qasim wrote Hawal ul Khawakin. So it tells history up to 1739, and he was Bakshi of Nizam ul Mulk. Nizam was the Mughal noble who started the Asabjai dynasty, that is the rule of Nizam in south, first at Aurangabad, then the capital was transferred to Hyderabad. Uh, he talks about that event later Mughal, how there was a decline and how Nizam founded his independent kingdom. He gives information about the decline of the Mughal. And now, apart from this, there were certain Hindus also who wrote in Persian, and the important was Bhimsen Buranpuri, who wrote Nuksha Dil Kusha. Then there were Ishwar Das Nagar, who wrote Futuhati Alamgiri, and both of them were in the service of Aurangzeb. Bhimsen, he traveled extensively all over the empire, and these books are important because they reflect the perception about what Hindu thought about Aurangzeb's rule. And they did not wrote on the order of the king, but it is an independent account. uh, his account of South India is very important. Then during this time, an Italian traveler, Niccolo Manucci, he came to India, and he was in the service of Jai Singh first, and then in the service of Dara Shikoh and then Aurangzeb, and he accompanied Aurangzeb to south, and he wrote this book, Storia the Mogor. This is the English translation. So this also is an important source of Mughal history written during the Mughal period. Then Siyaul Muntakarin is written by Sayyid Ghulam Hussain, and it gives about the information about the last period of Mughal rule and beginning of British rule in Bengal. So this is all about the Mughal historiography. We have talked about autobiographical writing, that is Tuzuki Babri and Tuzuki Jahangiri. Then we have talked about certain biographical writing. Then we have talked about Akbar's period, two important historian, Badayuni and Abul Fazl, and how they had a different opinion. Then Aurangzeb, he was against history writing as such, but there were a number of people who wrote history independently. There was Mustad Khan, and there was another text, and there was another text written by Kafi Khan, and there were these two Hindus, Vincent Buranpuri and Ishwar Das Nagar, who wrote in Persian language during that period. Then there was a story of the Mogar written by the Italian traveler Manuki. And now let us talk about the salient feature of Mughal historiography. The historiography during this period is quite rich and diverse, very extensive, and diverse subjects are dealt with. Most of the historians, they were related to court. They were either holding high office or official historian. Uh, and in comparison to the Sultanate period history writing, the historian of this period was relatively liberal. They seems to be objective, and Aurangzeb's period, the special feature of Aurangzeb's period is an independent historian, non-official historian. Most of the historian, they were participant in the political events, so their account is quite reliable. They were of course not completely free of biasness. For example, Abul Fazl, who wrote very detailed, do not give any importance to Todarmal. In fact, Todarmal was very important in constructing the revenue system. Subject matter is very varied. They have written. Causation is poor. No, not much causation is done. So though the history writing was quite enormous, it did not develop any philosophical basis. Well, and the imparting of the moral values, it continued to be the one of the reason behind the history writing. So this is where the history writing during Mughal period ends. If you are having any doubt, you can ask me.